Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Sahra, and this is Access Point, where I explore conversations around technology, justice, and the stories that shape us. I sit down with brilliant thinkers and builders, witnesses across the globe to ask how we can be of service with dignity, equity, and care. And the person that I am interviewing today exemplifies that deeply. So we are going to talk with Suad Abdelaziz. She is a Sudanese American lawyer and the founding executive director of Decolonize Sudan, a human rights advocacy organization. At Decolonize Sudan, she documents abuses, files human rights complaints on behalf of victims, develops political education materials, and leads advocacy training across the US. So I has spent her time and career supporting liberation movements and human rights defenders in the global South as a movement lawyer, advising on issues of free speech, surveillance, corporate accountability under international human rights law. She was born and raised in Hassahisa, Sudan, where most of her family still remains today. Hello, Suad. Welcome.
Hello, peace, Sahara. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be interviewed by you and platformed on Access Point. I think that this work is so important of platforming those doing the work in social justice sphere, especially at this time when there is so much hopelessness going around around our such a bleak time, and you and all of those that you are platforming are encouraging people to act instead of stay complacent in that hopelessness, but instead mobilize.
Mobilize, absolutely. And on speaking on that, you can recognize that because you're actually doing that same work as well. And we'll get into, the whole concept of decolonization and how that, informs the work that we do. But maybe you can start with telling me telling us a little bit about, painting us a picture of what's happening in Sudan right now, for those of us who are not following.
Thank you so much for that question. So there's a lot of misinformation and lack of narrative clarity around what has been happening in Sudan. And the work of our organization aims to clarify that narrative, and to work on that kind of strategic narratives that we can put forth. And so 2 years ago, almost to the date, to a couple of months ago, a private militia called the Rapid Support Forces, also called the RSF, violently seized much of Sudan. And ever since, our people have been forced to live through the unimaginable. I myself have lost countless relatives. All of our family has been displaced, either internally or externally. Our ancestral home has been destroyed. Much of my family remains and is in a very insecure spot as far as either living within our self-controlled regions or living in other regions facing destabilization that now where they are facing starvation. And facing man-made famine. And my story is one of millions in Sudan today. And so what the setting the groundwork of one of the most important narrative issues in Sudan is that what's happening in Sudan is not a civil war. It is a genocidal, foreign-backed militia that has violently invaded and it has occupied much of our country. And we explicitly use the terms occupation and genocide for a multitude of reasons, which we can discuss more about. But the RSF itself is a private militia. It is a business enterprise whose sole motivation is profit through resource extraction and control of land. The RSF is led by a war criminal who had his start working up the ranks as a mercenary carrying out the Darfur genocide. His name is Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hameti. And in 2013, Hameti restructured this kind of alliance of militias into his own private militia group called the Rapid Support Forces. And he incorporated this militia force as a transnational corporation, which dealt in war crimes globally, particularly in counterinsurgency campaigns throughout the Middle East and North African regions. So it's not isolated to Sudan. What the RSF has done in 2014, they were contracted by Saudi Arabia to massacre civilians in Yemen. In 2017, they were deployed by the European Union as mercenary border patrol to violently stop migrants making their way to Italy, oftentimes killing those migrants. And in 2019, they were hired by the former Libyan military commander to aid in his military campaign of targeting civilians and massacring civilians within Libya. So the RSF is not an isolated force. It is a private militia made up of mercenary forces. And the RSF has now shifted into a strategy of annexing the west of Sudan, and it has explicitly put out what this policy will mean, and it will mean genocide and ethnic cleansing of those in the west to forcibly remove and massacre those in the west of Sudan in order to take control of that western region. And again, this is purely for resources, for resource extraction. The West is very agriculturally rich in its soil, and it has many minerals, the largest of which being gold, which is being extracted en masse directly to the United Arab Emirates. So the RSF is, this would not be possible without the United Arab Emirates orchestration. The United Arab Emirates provides the RSF, and it's now been documented with the bulk of its arms. It provides it with financing and provides it with fighters. So when we discuss what's going on in Sudan as a civil war, or as perhaps as a clash between military factions, that is not only incorrect, but it is completely absolving of accountability the United Arab Emirates that is orchestrating all of this, and this militia force that is operating with impunity and being treated as some type of legitimate entity, which it is not by the Sudanese people. Widely regard the RSF as a mercenary force that has no popular support. So that's kind of a broad overview of what's happened within the past 2 years. But there's a lot I could delve into as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that. My God, I was listening to you, and I'm from Somalia, very much connected to anything that happens in that part of the world. And in hearing you make the connection from Sudan, Yemen, what's happening in Yemen, how destabilized Libya is, my own people making that journey, held for ransom, you name it, all these kinds of things that are happening. And I keep thinking, in the back of my mind, that even something like a private militia is not something that is a Western concept of like understanding, right? To like that it is when we talk about the narrative, right? That it is more like the narrative of civil war is more readily accessible to people.
Mm.
And the idea that a whole country and a whole people and a whole region can be infiltrated like by mercenary forces like that you know, that like it is much more comfortable and like you said absolving to be like no, that's their problem, that it's self-started. Can you tell me just a little bit about private militias? Because and also who are they? Are they, I mean, I know like they're Arabs, whatever that, but like, you know, it's and like also, and I'm sure the answer is yes, but I know that you know more about this than I do. But what is the relationship between the West and, you know, the RSF agenda, you know, and regionally, global, you know what I mean? Because all these things are connected. So yeah, if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so to your first point, the dangers of private militias. So this is something that we are going to have to contend with and create laws and structures to address in the coming days, because private militia groups taking over entire regions, that's something that you know, the UN and other international bodies didn't, you know, really contemplate that what was a reality, that people could be so rich that they could buy a private militia to take over an entire or destabilize an entire region.
How many people are in the, would you say, in the militia?
In the RSF. So
Yeah.
this is what's in 2019, the estimates were that it was 10,000 men up against an army of millions, which is the Sudanese army. So when this happened in 2023, this is why the Sudanese people were taken aback, because we could not have imagined that this small mercenary force was able to overtake the national military and for the first time in Sudan's history invade and bomb the capital of Sudan. This has never that had never happened before. Completely destabilized Sudan to a place that it has never in its history witnessed. And how did this small mercenary force, how were they able to do that? And now looking back, we know that it is the answer to that is external backing. That from long before 2023, there are documented meetings with U.S. With the U.S. U.S. officials, with Israeli officials, and with, of course, UAE officials. The Hemedti back in 2019 started a contract with an Israeli PR and international relations company called Dickens and Madsen, and this company was instrumental in creating this civil war narrative, especially within Western media. And so this is why you have very different headlines coming from Western media versus Sudanese media of, you know, civil war, rivaling factions versus, you know, this militia needs to be stopped. Genocidal, you know, militia is terrorizing and destabilizing our lands. So to the point of private militias, that that you know, Elon Musk could buy. He's the richest man in the world. He could buy a mercenary force and take over not only one country, but his net worth is more than the GDP of many countries, and so he could take over entire regions with private militias. And the danger of this is that there is a a gray area of law and of policy to address this. What happens when transnational corporations begin to take on the role of states and destabilize and control entire regions? There is no international hard law to address this. Corporate actors, so that's what the private militias are. They're corporate entities. And so in order to address the problem of militias, we must address the vast network of corporations committing war crimes and hold the corporations accountable. And of course, that's not going to happen because there is a lot of corporate lobbying in these spaces. So this is the conundrum that we're in, that we're facing.
There's no precedent. There's no law precedent.
No, there is no hard law to address.
But there's also opportunity to draw these hard lines now.
There certainly is, yeah. And I think there's that's the role of, one role of lawyers, of movement lawyers, is to address create law through precedent and through creative litigation. So that's it's definitely being addressed by a lot of attorneys, but there's this gap that international institutions are not stepping in to fill. How do we hold private militias accountable, especially ones that operate transnationally? So to your other question around what is the makeup of the RSF? So the head of the RSF, founder, the executive director, because this is a corporation, is Hemeti, and he himself identifies as Arab. He was born in Chad, along the border of Chad and Sudan, so he himself is Chadian. And the makeup of the RSF is not uniform, and is not, there is no ideological uniformity there. It is a huge group of mercenaries, of mostly poor Black men from surrounding countries that have been recruited in, given large sums of money, or promised you can loot in an area and take whatever you would like from that area. And
these are downtrodden people.
That's right, yeah, and the RSF is capitalizing on that. So the majority of the militia itself is not. They're not, even the lower rung of the militiamen don't even understand what they're doing. Many. So the UAE actually. This is one of the most documented cases, so I'll bring this up. The UAE brought in a group of 1,000 Colombian mercenaries to come into Sudan and massacre those, especially within the Al Jazeera region. And many of these Colombian mercenaries went on to be interviewed and talked about how it is that they were interviewed actually by Colombian media, and they were talking about how it is that they got into this place. And they were, talking about how, I'm impoverished, and I was told, there's this mission, you'll go to Sudan, and was not told any information around what it is for, but told that you'll be given a large sum of money, some that I've never heard of before in my life. And so, of course, took this opportunity. And then coming into Sudan, realized what they were doing. They were massacring the indigenous population. So this is just an example, a documented example of the majority of the makeup of the RSF is these militia, these mercenaries that have no cohesion, no ideological, national, racial cohesion. They're just there to pay for play, they're given an amount, or they're given a promise that you can take whatever amount it is that you loot. And of course, we'll turn the other way as you rape women, because rape and sexual assault is used as a weapon of war for the RSF. And not only women. Not only women, but men and children as well. There's so many documented.
And the other point to that is the that how do you prosecute these crimes since it is a private entity, like war crimes, right? Like, because they're able to use, you know, every war tactic that they can to these people.
Yeah, and perhaps the majority of the militia men don't have genocidal intent. They're just there because they're paid.
Yeah. Oh gosh, they're there just because they get paid. Ooh. So, let's move on maybe to a little bit about the concept and the work of Decolonize Sudan in practice, especially during this active conflict. How did it come to be? And maybe you could even go into more about just decolonial work after that, and the relationship between that and liberation movements. But
yeah, of course. So Decolonize Sudan, the organization that I founded, and it is now a grassroots collective organization led by Sudanese people for Sudanese people, and our work is to provide one, education on what's going on in Sudan, narrative clarity, and advocacy. How do we strategize? How do we organize now that we know what's going on? So the third rung is also documenting and telling the stories of Sudanese people on the ground, because there is this huge gap in Sudanese voices being heard on this issue, and that's for
by design.
Yeah, by design. Yeah, exactly. And so our work is grounded first and foremost in anti-imperialism, and this is we assert that colonialism lives on in Sudan, and it does throughout the global South, and this is through a system of neocolonialism, and this system operates in many ways. It operates through resource extraction. It operates through covert military counterinsurgency and counterterrorism campaigns and policies, and it operates in overt military intervention, boots on the ground, offensive bombings, like in Somalia, like in Haiti, like in Iraq, in Yemen, and of course, economic coercion in the form of blockades, in the form of sanctions, and strategically leveraged humanitarian and developmental aid, amongst other forms of control. So when we start to understand this framework that is alive and well in Sudan, along with all of our neighbors in the global South, we operate and build tools of campaigns to resist imperialism, rather than we try to move beyond the framework of humanitarian crisis, and think about it as a struggle of imperialism, as a crisis against neocolonialism, rather than, I think all of your viewers and you have heard all of the stats around Sudan, and maybe some stories, but understanding the root causes of why this is happening is a gap that we seek to fill. There's for myself, this comes from the concept of human rights is a very NGO-ized concept where I'm from, and most people in Sudan don't see human rights as being a part of human rights. They're like, human rights? What human rights? What are you talking about? And it is a concept that belongs to the NGOs that have swooped in, and that's my experience growing up in Sudan, is that I've seen all of these NGOs coming in from outside to save us with this framework of human rights, but nothing connecting this a universal term of what human rights, of what people-centered human rights should be to our people and from our people. And so that's a lot of our work is to be by and for Sudanese people and for those who stand in solidarity with Sudanese people. Amilcar Cabral, he says, he has a quote that says, "We must resist not only the foreign soldier, but also the foreign bank and the foreign curriculum and the foreign NGO that tells us how to develop, that tells us that they will help us." And so we try to get away from this framework of help and aid and think about collective struggle and grassroots struggle.
Yeah, I love that. And I ascribe to that same, probably because, you know, where I'm from in the world and my own experiences. But I love your framing of the what is humanitarianism in, you know, what are human rights. It's very interesting, like the NGOs are a part of the narrative, right? They're a part of perpetuating that narrative of helplessness and savior, right? That somehow these people don't know how to be human beings without intervention.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in every sense of the word. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, no, like self-actualization has to be self, you know, like it has to be the country, it has to be the people. It can't come from something, you know, some external force. And if it does, that we should definitely be suspicious of it, you know. But I love that. And one of the things that you have done in educating me is is recognizing that there are some countries like Sudan and my country for sure as well. But I'm from the north in northern Somalia, and we have our own issues. I've never been to Mogadishu. I know that they have issues as well, and I have family there, but like I know more of the regional northern issues. So the humanitarianism, the NGOs are more like in the south, in my experience. But yeah, that infiltration is so deep, and that narrative work, and it even extends, like, yeah, one of the things that you taught me is that, like, yeah, that in places like Sudan, that there's such a heavy presence of NGOs
Mm-hmm.
that, like, it's very possible for those of us who are even informed to not know that this is something that's like been infused and embedded into the culture, like without against their will.
Yeah, and a huge problem with that is that in 2023, when the RSF came in and started, you know, the violent campaign, all the NGOs retreated because they're not from there and they don't have actual stake in what's going on in Sudan.
A lot of this, like, to me, comes to documentation. And I'm so grateful that you all are documenting. So I know we have like maybe, you know, like about 15 minutes left. So I definitely want to get into the actual work that Decolonize Sudan is doing by way of documentation, and maybe talk a little bit about that resource gap, that information gap that is, you know, missing by design, but also very much missing. And you all are a part of, you know, getting that. And then maybe talk a little bit about movement law briefly, and what that like how you came into that, and how you are using movement law to further this work.
Yeah, so, you know, Sudan is often described as a forgotten war, and that you know, wording is so problematic in many ways because it's not forgotten by the people. It's certainly understood and not forgotten, but it's just not reported and not really cared for enough to really investigate what's happening. And so when I hear that, I say, so I would say that there are three major factors to why Sudan, why the average person might not understand or know what's happening in Sudan. And the first of that is that many Sudanese activists have brought up is anti-Blackness. And when we say that anti-Blackness is a factor and why the largest scaled crisis in the world, and I want to emphasize this because this is said a lot, like largest crisis in the world, but what does that mean? This is the largest mass displacement in modern history. In modern history, 15 to 16 million people, those are only the documented numbers, internally and externally displaced. The most devastating humanitarian crisis in terms of scale in the 21st century, over 1 million killed directly in massacres alone. And this is not accounting for all of the indirect deaths due to starvation and disease, due to infrastructure collapse, which hasn't even been monitored and reported on at the scale that it needs to be. Over half of all human beings on Earth that are facing starvation are in Sudan right now. And so when we say that anti-Blackness is a factor and why this is getting ignored, we're referring to the dismissal of Black conflict as just African or Black, just African or just Black people fighting amongst themselves. And this points to an overall devaluing of the Black life as not worthy of investigation. And other factors are, two, the lack of photographic journalism and reporting. One factor that I've just mentioned is all of the NGOs that were at the helm of reporting, that had taken over, reporting on human rights abuses, of course, retreated in 2023. And so it was left up to the average Sudanese civilian to document and report their own atrocities. And of course, a lack of photographic journalism. And this was in part due to the mass targeted killings of journalists by the RSF in 2023, even before 2023. And then blackouts. That when the RSF begins to control an area, the first thing that it does is the RSF has bought out the main telecommunications companies in Sudan. So when it takes over a region, it blacks out all of the people in that region from communicating. For over a year, I wasn't able to communicate with my family in Hasahis because the RSF had taken control in that time. And then the third factor is a lack of coordinated organizing. And this is a huge factor that we are working on putting the work into, and coordinating and mobilizing, particularly Sudanese diaspora, in a strategic way, with narrative clarity and with clear demands and clear action items. So this is kind of the factors around why Sudan, why I would, why Sudan has been largely ignored. And then there's also that factor of intentional disinformation. Many UAE, particularly UAE media sources, have pushed a narrative that the RSF is a reformist militia or a reformist faction, and actually has state power that is only coming to reform these savage terrorists, because they're calling the army Islamist, and that's just another word for terrorists. I would say there's also this very clear campaign of disinformation, and of course, Hamidti has worked, has documented work with a PR and international relations company to not only do this, but there was also recent news that came out that he gave that company $6 million specifically to coordinate a meeting between him and Trump. So we'll see if that meeting happens. But I know Trump is,
and that's verified.
yeah,
That's
fair.
confirmed.
Yeah, and it's not confirmed that Trump has accepted. But Trump is currently, he's making all these deals, these peace deals around the world. And he's currently,
and right now,
he's talking about how he's going to make a deal in Sudan to achieve peace, and if it's anything, if it's anything like the deal that he recently made for Congo, then we know that it's not peace at all. It's solely about resource extraction, because in Congo, coming out of that deal, the U.S. gets $2 trillion worth of minerals from Congo. It doesn't call for withdrawal of the M23 militia in Congo, no accountability for Rwanda. The violence will continue in Congo. So these U.S. facilitated peace deals are obviously not going to help us and are actually going to harm our people. And so we have to be very careful in engaging with entities really calling for U.S. intervention or U.S. leadership to intervene.
Yeah. It is dawning on me that I think we're going to have to do a part 2.
Let's do it. I'm excited.
Yeah. So we'll do that. We'll do a part 2, and we'll focus on the rest. But I'll just end here for this time, and just say thank you. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. So I'm truly grateful to be given this space, be in space with you, and to have met you. Sahra, it's really an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.